Beneath the dim kitchen lights, I stood still, surrounded by the wreckage of Thanksgiving. Half-drunk crystal glasses glittered under the pendants, abandoned across the granite counters. A caterer moved quietly in the background, stacking dishes with deliberate care, careful not to meet my eyes. I stared down at my phone, my fingers gripping it until they turned white. My father's voice filled the room again, his words sharp, deliberate, each one landing like a knife. All you do is take, Sloan. You've never given this family anything that matters. The message ended. I pressed replay. His voice echoed again, no less cutting than before. My chest felt tight, like I couldn't draw a full breath. There was disbelief, yes, but also something harder, sharper. I pressed my palm to the cold countertop, grounding myself against the swell of feeling. The caterers moved around me as if I were a fixture to avoid. One of them dropped a fork. It hit the floor with a sharp clang, making me flinch. Just 3 hours ago, I was placing fresh flowers in the entryway when the doorbell rang. That familiar twist of hope and dread knotted my stomach, the same one that surfaced before every family gathering. I smoothed my camel-colored cashmere sweater, checked my reflection in the hall mirror, and opened the door with a smile that felt both practiced and hopeful. Hi, Mom. Dad, I greeted, stepping aside. Happy Thanksgiving. My mother walked right past, eyes scanning the foyer like a hawk. New curtains, she asked. Bit dramatic for this space, don't you think? My father didn't even glance up, too consumed with a phone call he refused to end. I swallowed the first wave of disappointment. The caterers are in the dining room. Can I get you something to drink? I asked. But before either of them could respond, I heard the rumble of Tessa's BMW pulling up. She emerged like a scene from a luxury commercial, expensive perfume clinging to the air, her blowout untouched by the chilly November breeze. Cody trailed behind her, unshaven and obviously hungover, but still managed that annoyingly charming smile. Sloan, Tessa said, kissing the air beside my cheek. You look tired. Work keeping you up. Business is good, I said simply, omitting the all-nighter I pulled, finishing the hotel lobby design. The very project funding this entire dinner. No one offered to help as I darted between the kitchen and dining room, checking final details. They settled in the living room, sipping the wine I'd spent weeks selecting, critiquing the artwork I'd hung. Meanwhile, I managed the logistics, caterers, timing, place settings. When we finally sat at the table, fine linens, heirloom china I'd hunted down myself, Dad cleared his throat. A toast. A flicker of warmth bloomed in my chest, maybe this time. To family, he said. The ones who always show up when it matters most. My smile froze as his eyes moved right past me. The others raised their glasses solemnly, nodding as if they were the ones who had stepped up during the pandemic, paid off the mortgage on the family home, helped cover Tessa's divorce lawyer, or Cody's perpetually overdue rent. The turkey looks dry, my mom muttered loudly as I served her plate. Later, as dessert plates were cleared, Tessa pulled me aside with that particular smile, the one that always came before a favor. The boys need new hockey equipment, she began, casually mentioning her pending divorce. I barely heard the rest. My mind flashed to 2020. To the $45,000 0 cents I'd lent our parents, complete with a contract drafted by my lawyer, Daniel. Not once had it been acknowledged, let alone repaid. Then the lakeside cabin came to mind, the one I bought outright, hoping it might become a space where we could all come together. They used it endlessly. No one ever said thank you. Now, alone in the kitchen, I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. There it was, a long list of recurring transfers, $2,000 0 cents each month to my parents, $1,500 0 cents to Tessa, $950 0 cents to Cody for his temporary housing that had stretched over 3 years, and still, you've never given this family anything that matters. A single tear slid down my cheek, icy and clear. My finger hovered over the first transaction. I pressed cancel, then the next, and the next. With each confirmation, I felt my lungs expand a little more. The kitchen around me felt larger, as if the walls had moved outward. One of the caterers glanced at me as a soft sound escaped, something between a laugh and a gasp. "If I've never given anything," I whispered, slipping the phone back into my pocket, "then I suppose I can stop now." Before the sun rose, I quietly loaded my small leather weekender into the trunk of my car. The neighborhood was still asleep, windows dark, porch lights casting faint halos on the sidewalk. My hands trembled slightly as I looked at my phone one last time. 27 missed calls, 43 unread messages, all from people who swore I never gave anything. "Cabin outside Portland," I murmured to myself, starting the engine. The clock on the dash blinked. 5:17. 3 hours had passed since I canceled the payments. Sleep hadn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, my father's voice echoed, "All you do is take." I pulled away from the home I had renovated from the ground up, every corner a reflection of my taste, my effort, my love, none of it ever seen or appreciated. The tires whispered across damp pavement as I left Austin behind. The Texas hill country unfurled in the rearview mirror, shrouded in darkness. My fingers hovered over my phone. One more button, airplane mode. I pressed it. And in that silence, in the pure, weightless quiet that followed, I felt my first full breath in years. A breath that didn't carry the weight of expectation, guilt, or endless giving. I didn't know what came next. But for the first time, I didn't need to. By late morning, I crossed the Oklahoma state line. A gentle layer of snow had settled along the roadside, transforming the terrain into something unfamiliar, almost surreal, a stark contrast to the world I'd left behind in Texas. It felt symbolic, like the universe was mirroring my own transformation. I allowed myself a small smile, one born not of joy, but of recognition, of the quiet, poetic justice in all of it. 3 days later, I found myself standing barefoot on the wooden deck of a cedar cabin, nestled deep within a forest in Oregon. The air was rich with pine and the earthy scent of petrichor, seeping into every breath like a remedy I never knew I needed. No one knew I was here, not even my assistant. Only Daniel, my lawyer, had been informed. And he'd sworn absolute discretion. Mist clung to the treetops, softening the sky, blurring the line between earth and heaven. It looked like a watercolor painting come to life, and I stood in it, exhaling, for what felt like the first time in years. Inside the cabin, I spread my sketchbook across a rugged wooden table, its surface scarred with the lives of trees long gone. My pencil moved without hesitation, without direction, guided only by instinct. The designs that flowed weren't commissions or drafts to impress a client or please a parent. They weren't confined by budgets or constrained by taste. They were mine, raw, unfiltered, and for once, entirely free of expectation. That night, I slept through till morning without stirring. No waking nightmares, no sudden jolts, just rest, deep, uninterrupted sleep. In Austin, meanwhile, my phone sat charging on the kitchen counter, silenced and undisturbed. It became a collection basket for digital panic, a confessional booth where guilt and entitlement were laid bare in missed calls and desperate texts. "Sloan, my car payment bounced. Call me right now." Tessa's voice, high-pitched and sharp, rang through one voicemail, filled with indignant entitlement, as if my money was a birthright she'd been denied. Another message followed, this one from Cody. "Hey sis, something weird happened with my rent. Landlord's threatening eviction. Need to talk ASAP." His voice carried that artificial cool he always put on when he was actually panicking. Then my mother's cracked voice. "Sloan? Elizabeth? This isn't funny. The mortgage is overdue. They say they'll take the house. Call us back, please." Her voice cracked on the last word, the mask of pride slipping into something close to fear. More messages followed, flooding in like water breaching a dam. First demanding, then confused, then angry, then quiet. but not one message contained an apology. No one asked if I was okay. Not a single one of them wondered where I might be or why I'd left. Their world had been shaken, and not by my absence, but by the absence of what I gave. In the cabin, time moved differently. I lost track of days. I hiked until my legs ached and lungs burned. I sketched until my hand cramped. I sat by the stone fireplace, staring into the ever-shifting flames, mesmerized by their flickering rhythm, their hunger, their beauty. It was the first time in so long that I was alone without being lonely. On my final morning there, 3 weeks after my quiet exodus, I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window with a mug of tea warming my hands, watching an eagle ride the wind above the trees. I whispered to the bird, I'm ready. Ready for what came next. I had booked several more weekends at the cabin for the coming year, my own retreat, my space to breathe. The drive back to Texas didn't feel like a return. It felt like a choice, a reclaiming. The land, the roads, the sky, none of it weighed me down as it had before. My hands were steady on the wheel. My shoulders, once permanently hunched near my ears, had finally dropped, relaxed. I arrived home after midnight. The house greeted me like an old friend. The scent of cedar polish and dried lavender welcomed me. I moved through it slowly, watering my neglected plants, touching the spines of books I had chosen with care over the years. The place hadn't changed, but I had. At dawn, golden sunlight spilled through the windows, catching on floating dust motes like suspended stars. I stood in my kitchen, coffee cupped between my palms. Then, with calm resolve, I turned off airplane mode. My phone lit up like a volcano. Notifications erupted across the screen, messages, emails, voicemails, a digital tantrum. Panic made pics. The last voicemail, time stamped just the day before, was from Tessa. They repossessed my car today. Her voice cracked. In front of the boys. Do you even realize how humiliating that was? What kind of sister lets that happen? I set my coffee down and typed a single line into our family group chat. Thought I never gave this family anything. Within seconds, replies surged in. Where have you been? How could you do this to us? We've been so worried. Are you having a breakdown? Not one of them said, sorry. Not one asked if I needed anything. I called Daniel's office and scheduled a meeting. Then I silenced my phone again and walked to my design table. Sunlight painted my drafting paper with warmth. I ran my fingers over the sketches I'd brought back from Oregon, designs that came from silence, space, solitude. They carried no burden, no expectation, only freedom. Sometimes I still hear my father's voice. All you do is take. But now I understand what lay beneath those words. It wasn't disdain, it was fear. Fear that if I ever realized how much I gave, I might stop. I picked up my pencil and added a bold line to the design before me. Unflinching, grounded, the beginning of something new. The next day, the landline in my office rang for the 7th time that morning. I didn't move. I simply watched the cord sway. Margot, my assistant, appeared in the doorway. Her silver-framed glasses caught the light. Your mother again, she said gently. Want me to say you're in a meeting? I nodded. And Cody's downstairs, she added. Again. The pencil snapped in my grip. I placed the broken pieces down with care. Then, breathing steadily, just as Daniel had coached me, I met her eyes. Tell him I'm not available. And if he shows up drunk again, have security escort him out. Margot nodded, and for a brief second, her gaze softened. Not with pity, but respect. 3 weeks. That's how long it took for the panic to boil over. For their illusion of control to collapse. For me to find the strength I had forgotten I had. 3 weeks, and I wasn't going back. 20 minutes later, the elevator chimed from the ground floor, followed by a voice I'd know anywhere. Cody's, loud and unapologetic, his frustration echoing through the open office space like a siren. I pressed my palms against the smooth, cold surface of my drafting table, grounding myself as his words rose, crystal clear and drenched in accusation. You can't keep avoiding us. Mom needs her medication. Do you even care? My fingers twitched, the tremble subtle but undeniable, and yet something was missing. The familiar rush of guilt that usually seized me in moments like this, tightening its grip on my chest like a vice. But this time, it didn't come. The air around me held firm. I inhaled deeply. A moment later, I heard the low, firm tone of the security guard, calm, unwavering. Then came the sharp ding of elevator doors closing, and just like that, silence returned until my phone vibrated. Another message, the third that morning from Tessa. I didn't need to open it to know what it would say. Still, I glanced down and read it anyway. Mom's blood pressure is through the roof because of you. Hope you're happy playing the victim while your family suffers. I set the phone face down on the table and turned back to my work. The absurdity wasn't lost on me. My personal life was burning to the ground, yet my professional life had never flourished more. Just yesterday, the owners of the Marquis Hotel approved my preliminary design sketches without a single note. It was a first in my career. No revisions, total trust in my vision, a rare, heady validation. Without knocking, Daniel strode into my office. His movements, brisk and direct, matched the swing of his leather briefcase as it tapped gently against his leg. He didn't speak right away, just approached and laid a folder on my desk with a sigh, then began loosening his tie. They're contesting the cabin deed, he said, claiming it was purchased under false pretenses, that it was meant to be a family property, not a personal one. A dry laugh escaped me, humorless and brittle. False pretenses? I echoed. I have emails, explicit emails, where they asked me to find a lakeside property with 4 bedrooms for family vacations. No ambiguity. Daniel dropped into the chair opposite me, letting the weight of his words settle. They're also telling people you're having a breakdown. I blinked, tasting the word like poison. A breakdown, I repeated slowly, because I stopped paying their bills. He nodded solemnly. Your cousin Leah called my office this morning. Your parents have been telling the extended family that you're mentally unstable. A sharp pain twisted in my gut. Leah and I had grown up like sisters, until distance, life, and years had pulled us apart. The thought of her hearing those lies made my chest tighten. What did she say? I asked, quieter than I meant to. Daniel's lips twitched into a rare smile. She said, and I quote, "Tell Sloan it's about damn time she stopped carrying them." And just like that, something deep inside me shifted. A weight uncoiled. Someone saw me. Someone understood. My phone buzzed again, dragging me back to reality. This time, a group text from my father. Your behavior is destroying this family. We've always supported your little design business. This is how you repay us? Little design business. The same business that paid their mortgage for 2 years, that covered Tessa's lawyer fees. That kept Cody from being evicted time after time. I slid the phone toward Daniel. Add that to the evidence folder. He nodded, tucking it away. The 90-day notice was delivered yesterday. They have until March 15th. 12 weeks. 3 months. Until the reckoning. In my mind, I pictured the calendar. Red X's marking off each passing day until I reclaimed what was mine. Not just the money, the dignity, the boundaries. They'll escalate, I murmured. Not as a fear, but as a certainty. Daniel stood, smoothing his jacket. Have you thought about staying elsewhere? Your address is public record. I nodded. We devised a plan. 2 hours later, Margot entered again, looking tense. Tessa's downstairs. She brought the kids. I closed my eyes. The receptionist says the boys are running around the lobby, pulling fabric samples off the walls. My nieces. They were my weakness. Sticky fingers, toothless grins, boundless energy. But dragging them here, using them as emotional leverage, that crossed a line even I hadn't predicted. Have security escort them out, I said. Voice steady. Tell Tessa she can schedule an appointment if she needs to speak professionally. Margot nodded and retreated. Daniel, watching, gave me a look. Half surprise, half approval. You're stronger than they expected. The compliment stung more than it soothed. Strength was never what I wanted from them. I only ever wanted acknowledgement, reciprocity. My computer pinged an email notification. Subject line, urgent, mom in hospital, your fault. I didn't even open it, just closed the laptop. Last week it was dad's chest pains. The week before, Cody's supposed eviction notice. If this really were a medical emergency, they could sell the boat. The one they bought after I paid for their new roof. I murmured aloud, sell the boat! Daniel's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and grimaced. Your father, fourth call today. Block him, I said. Block all of them. After he left, I walked to the window. The city shimmered below, winter sunlight bouncing off glass and steel, carving lines and shapes across the skyline. For a moment, I saw the world not in chaos, but in patterns. Clean lines, defined spaces, purpose in every angle. Unlike my family. Chaotic, endless, consuming. My phone vibrated again, a text from an unknown number. I didn't need to guess. My mother, borrowing someone's phone. You, father, and I gave you everything. We sacrificed for your education, and this is how you repay us? Placed the phone in my desk drawer and shut it firmly. On my wall, a calendar bore a single red circle around March 15th. Foreclosure date. A day not just for settling debts, but for reclaiming something far more valuable. Truth, respect, boundaries. I turned back to my designs. My hand didn't shake as I adjusted the curvature of a wall in one of my sketches. I created a space where light could flood in from an unexpected angle. Auction day arrived. I adjusted the collar of my silk blouse in the rearview mirror, cream-colored, no frills, nothing excessive, just a clean line, a clear intention. Today, my statement would be in my actions, not in what I wore, not in how I smiled, not in any attempt to smooth edges or soothe tempers. The auction sign outside the house I once called home glinted in the morning sun, reflected faintly in my windshield as I turned onto the street where I had grown up. That familiar stretch of suburbia hadn't changed. Pristine lawns trimmed with precision, fences painted just enough to suggest care, and neighbors who practiced the art of pretending not to look while missing nothing. My morning had been intentional. Strong black coffee brewed dark and bitter, 15 minutes of controlled breathing to center myself, and a call from Daniel, calm and firm, confirming every legal detail was airtight. On my kitchen counter, I'd left behind a small brass object, the spare key to my parents' house. It sat there like a monument, the last symbolic tie between me and a past I no longer owed anything to. You sure about this? Daniel had asked. I hadn't hesitated. More certain than I've ever been, I replied. And it was true. At least, it had been then. But as I pulled into the driveway, that certainty flickered. Not from doubt, but from the surreal spectacle waiting for me. They were all there, lined up like soldiers guarding a citadel. My entire family had assembled to form a human barricade in front of the auction sign. Dad stood in the center, chest puffed, arms crossed, projecting the same dominance he once used to negotiate with bankers and car dealers. He was in his element. This was a battlefront. Next to him, Mom held a crumpled handkerchief to her mouth, eyes red and watery, though whether from genuine emotion or carefully timed tears, I couldn't say. Tessa stood with her arms folded tightly across her chest, her designer sunglasses perched like a crown atop her flawless hair. And Cody, unshaven, hollow-eyed, his jeans sagging and faded, had probably paid for those jeans. Hell, my money was in their washing machine lint trap. Across the street, Mrs. Lawson hovered over her flower beds, her watering can tilted at the same angle for far too long. The Hendersons slowed their morning walk to a crawl as if mesmerized by some street theater too good to pass up. I parked, turned off the engine, and for a moment just sat. The car's interior was silent, still, an eye of calm before the storm. I gripped the steering wheel, exhaled slowly, and stepped out. Dad was on me before I could fully close the door. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he barked. Exactly what the certified letter said I would, I replied evenly, shutting the car door with a soft click that sliced through the quiet like a gunshot. He lowered his voice, drawing closer. "Your mother hasn't slept in weeks." That familiar tone, half threat, half guilt trip, washed over me, a voice he'd reserved for making us fall in line. "Is this really what you want? To destroy the people who raised you?" I laughed, a sharp, strange sound that made even Tessa flinch. Raised me or used me? Mom moved forward, her handkerchief now gently tapping at invisible tears. "We gave you everything, Sloan. A beautiful home, good school, mounting debt and impossible expectations," I cut in. "By the way, how's that $45,000 0 cents loan repayment coming?" Dad's face shifted, a quick pivot from fury to charm. "Sweetheart, we've always supported your little design business," he said, voice oily. "Like when you told Uncle Robert my first big contract only happened because the client wanted to sleep with me," I said, my words slicing with perfect precision. "Yeah, I remember that support." "You're blowing things out of proportion," Tessa said quickly, stepping forward. "Then you didn't mean it when you told your divorce attorney I'd cover your legal fees indefinitely." I pulled out my phone, tapped the screen, scrolled. "Let me quote you. Sloane's good for it. She's always good for it." Cody's voice cracked as he finally spoke. "We always believed in your dreams." "No," I said, straightening my back. "You believed in my bank account. You believed I'd never stop giving." At the end of the street, a car pulled up, Calloway, the auctioneer. Behind him, 3 more vehicles arrived. I recognized them from the inspection day. Prospective buyers. Dad's voice dropped to a hiss. "You'll regret this for the rest of your life." Without breaking eye contact, I reached into my bag and pulled out a printed transcript of the voicemail he'd left me on Thanksgiving. The paper fluttered slightly in the morning breeze. "All you do is take, Sloan. You've never given this family anything that matters." I read it aloud, each word enunciated with surgical calm. "I'm just honoring your assessment." Mom let out a sob, a dramatic, exaggerated wail fit for the stage. Tessa rushed to console her, eyes burning with theatrical fury. "My children will never know their aunt after this," she hissed. "I'll make sure of it." The auctioneer approached. "Miss Sloan," he said, professionally. I turned from them, no more explanations, no more guilt. "Mr. Calloway," I said, extending my hand, "let's begin." 3 months later, I stood in the center of a sunlit Adobe-style home, empty but brimming with possibility. My footsteps echoed on the terracotta tiles, reverberating off bare walls. The realtor hovered politely in the entryway, giving me space to breathe, to observe, to choose. "The previous owners preserved the original Vigas," she said, pointing to the thick wooden ceiling beams, time-worn and beautiful. "They're over 100 years old." I reached up and ran my fingertips along a wall's textured surface. rough and unpolished. It felt solid, real. Outside, the Sangre de Cristo Mountains rose in the distance, silent, ancient, witnessing yet another beginning. Santa Fe was 700 miles from Austin, but the emotional distance felt far greater, as though I had stepped into another dimension entirely. The courtyard gets great afternoon sun, the realtor continued, perfect for coffee or reading. I stepped outside onto the enclosed patio. A soft wind teased the wind chime above the door. Light scattered across the flagstones. I felt the sun warm my shoulders. "I'll take it," I said simply. The realtor blinked in surprise, but I was already gone. In my mind, arranging furniture, planting herbs, placing the first book on a clean white shelf. I wasn't starting over. I was finally beginning. "Don't you want to see the rest of the properties I lined up?" the realtor asked, curiosity edging her voice. I shook my head with a quiet conviction. This one feels right. 2 hours later, we sat across from each other in a notary's office. The space was simple, bland walls, a faint scent of printer toner and floor wax. But the significance of what I was doing imbued the moment with weight. I signed document after document, each signature releasing another piece of the burden I'd carried for far too long. A house half the size of the one in Austin, and yet every line I wrote felt like a reclamation of something far more expansive. Freedom. When the final page was complete, the realtor slid a single key across the table. "Congratulations," she said with a smile. "It's a beautiful home." "No," I corrected gently. "It's becoming one." That evening, I unpacked only what I truly needed: a small suitcase, one carefully packed box of kitchen essentials, and my drafting table. The rest, clothing, books, furniture, remained in storage, waiting for me to decide what pieces of my old life deserved a place in this new chapter. I set up my drafting table in front of the largest window, the view opening onto the wild beauty of the high desert. As the sun slipped behind the mountains, the sky exploded in hues of blush pink, lavender, and molten orange. I clipped a blank sheet of paper to the table and began to draw. Not for a client, not for approval, but for myself. Lines appeared, soft and sure. My hand moved freely, untethered. The act of putting pencil to paper wrapped me in a calm I hadn't felt in years, a peace that came not from success, but from stillness. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Daniel. "Your parents moved into the West Side apartments yesterday, 2-bedroom. Tessa helped them." I read it, nodded to myself, and set the phone down. Another buzz. "Cody took a job at Miller Construction, full-time, with benefits." A small smile formed at the corner of my mouth, not because I was vindicated by their new reality, but because it meant something had finally shifted. They were adapting, finally facing consequences, finally standing on their own feet, however shaky those steps might be. A week later, my phone rang. It was Leah. I was unpacking a box of books in what would become my new home office. "Mom told me everything," she said as soon as I answered. "The auction. Santa Fe? All of it." I paused, a heavy design anthology balanced in my arms. "And?" Mm. "And I'm bringing homemade bread when I visit next month. Um, unless you'd prefer wine." "Both," I said, surprised at the laugh that bubbled up, genuine, unforced, soft. "Both it is," she replied warmly. Clients found me even before I updated my website. Word moved quickly in design circles, and soon my calendar was filling with consultations. But this time, the energy felt different. These weren't projects I took out of obligation or desperation. They weren't lifelines for a collapsing family. They were chosen for their creative potential, for the joy they offered. One quiet evening, while hanging architectural prints in my bedroom, my phone chimed. An email. The subject line read simply, "From Tessa." Fine. I sat on the edge of my bed, phone in hand, thumb hovering. Her name still stirred a complex storm inside me. Grief, fatigue, a flicker of curiosity. After several minutes, I opened it. I get it now. I'm sorry. 6 words. No explanation, no requests, no manipulation, just an acknowledgement. Late, but unadorned. I read them once, then again. Tears welled in my eyes, not because they healed anything, not because they changed what had come before, but because they confirmed what I already knew. I had made the right decision. I had saved myself. I didn't reply. Instead, I archived the message, not in anger, but because those 6 words were part of her journey, not mine. My healing didn't require her understanding. Still, a quiet part of me hoped she might one day find her own. Weeks later, I returned to the cabin. It had taken time to be ready to face the memories, the echoes, but I went. I drove up alone, the road winding through tall pines and dusty hills. I unlocked the front door and stepped into a space heavy with stories. Photos still hung on the wood-paneled walls, posed smiles, matching outfits. The illusion of closeness preserved in frames. I took each one down, one by one, stacked them gently in a box, not with resentment, but with finality, their place. I hung framed quotes, words about strength, reinvention, and courage. By Sunday afternoon, the air inside the cabin felt different, lighter. The space had changed, not just in appearance, but in purpose. On the drive back to Santa Fe, I made calls. I reached out to women's entrepreneur networks, offering the cabin as a venue for retreats, a space for rebuilding, a place where women could gather not to escape, but to rise. At the first retreat, one client walked through the front door and paused. "You turned a family hideaway into a Phoenix workshop," she said. "Perfect symmetry." I smiled. The cabin that once held entitlement and obligation now held hope. Sometimes healing doesn't come from what we hold on to, but from how we repurpose what broke us. 1 year later, I stood barefoot on the patio of my Santa Fe home. The clay tiles cool beneath my feet. The sunrise stretched across the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, brushing the horizon in amber and rose. I cradled a ceramic mug between my palms, the warmth grounding me. No buzzing phone, no waiting demands, no weight on my chest. "You look peaceful," Daniel said, leaning casually in the doorway, his coffee in hand. Our relationship had evolved, no longer just attorney and client, now something quieter, more grounded. We didn't need labels. It was enough to simply be. "I am," I said. Inside, my home radiated intention. The rooms weren't large, but every inch held meaning. A hand-woven rug warmed the floor. Copper pendants cast gentle light over my drafting table. Blueprints for the Women's Business Retreat Center lay waiting for final approval. The doorbell rang. "That'll be Margot," I said, patting across the floor. "She's bringing the birthday cake." She had followed me here, leaving behind the title of assistant for junior partner. Behind her came Leah, arms full of wild flowers. "No one celebrates birthdays quite like someone who spent years planning everyone else's while forgetting their own," Leah said, placing the blooms in a vase. For once, I had remembered to celebrate myself. And I wasn't alone. Sloan Lafetta's laughter, once a rare visitor reserved only for polite conversations and social obligations, now came freely. Not the brittle sound of forced cheer, but something richer, more whole. By nightfall, her Santa Fe patio shimmered under a canopy of string lights and flickering candles. The table beneath them held platters of roasted vegetables, chilled wine, and a simple lemon cake glowing in the center like a crown jewel. Around the table sat 8 people, friends, chosen family, people who had never demanded more than she offered, who brought dishes, cleared plates, and rinsed glasses without being asked. Margot lifted her glass, eyes bright behind her new wire-framed glasses. Before we cut into this masterpiece, she said, gesturing to the cake, I want to toast our birthday girl. Sloane felt her muscles tense instinctively, that deep reflex from years of bracing for praise that came with conditions. But this was different. To the woman who taught me that generosity without boundaries isn't generosity at all, Margot continued. Who showed me that walking away isn't weakness or failure, but sometimes the bravest, most loving thing you can do. To Sloane, the group echoed, glasses clinking softly against the New Mexico night. Something inside her unfurled. Not pride exactly, something quieter, something like acceptance. Later, long after the wine had been poured and stories shared, when only Daniel remained to help load the dishwasher, the glow of the evening still lingered in the air. The kitchen was hushed, but not empty. As Daniel rinsed the last plate, Sloane's phone lit up on the counter. Essa's name appeared on the screen, right on schedule. Her sister's annual attempt at reconnection, like clockwork, like a ghost arriving with the same chilling precision every year. Daniel glanced over. You don't have to read it, he said softly. I know, Sloane replied. She reached over, picked up the phone, and gently placed it face down without unlocking it. Not out of anger. The rage, like old firewood, had burned down to ash long ago. What remained was clarity, a stillness that didn't require confrontation. Some doors, she said, don't stay closed because of grudges. They stay closed because we've finally found better rooms to live in. The next morning, she made the familiar drive north, up winding roads through juniper-studded hills and stretches of rust-red desert, to the cabin retreat center. Once it had been her family's escape, their weekend playground. Now it was something else entirely. The sign at the entrance read, Your worth is not measured by what you give away. A young woman sat waiting on the porch steps, portfolio pressed tightly to her chest like armor. Her name was Alicia, an aspiring designer referred by a client, unsure of her path, unsure of herself. My parents think interior design is just glorified shopping, Alicia said, almost in a single breath as they sat down at the shaded table overlooking the trees. They want me to go to law school. Sloane didn't respond immediately. Instead, she nodded toward the folder. Show me your work, then we'll talk about parents. The sketches were raw but honest. Rooms that breathed, light that moved. There was talent. But more importantly, there was truth. Sloane poured 2 glasses of iced tea, the clink of ice the only sound for a moment. People confuse love with usefulness, she said quietly. I spent 3 decades believing I had to earn approval through sacrifice. Giving, always giving, hoping one day someone would see me beyond what I could offer. Alicia looked at her, wide-eyed. Did they ever understand? Sloane smiled. That was never the point. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the ridgeline and bathed the cabin in a soft amber glow, Sloane sat on the wooden dock, her bare feet skimming the water. The lake was quiet, the air still except for the occasional rustle of birds settling in the trees. She hadn't brought her phone. It rested on her nightstand inside, full of unanswered messages, none of them urgent, none of them defining. Where silence had once meant suffocation, now it meant space, safety, peace. I built my life on silence, she whispered into the wind, not because I had nothing to say, but because what I said finally mattered. And in the quiet that followed, she heard her own voice echo, not desperate, not muted, but whole.